The nurse had just finished a 14-hour ICU shift when the laughter started behind her. Two young men blocked her path at the diner counter, their jokes sharp, their smiles careless. Across the room, a former U.S. Marine sat with his canine, watching quietly, until the moment the line was crossed. What happened in the next few seconds turned a simple breakfast into a courtroom battle, a silent town into witnesses, and an ordinary man into the wrong one in handcuffs. One push, one restraint, one lie shouted loud enough to change everything. What the video later revealed would expose more than the truth. It would test who was willing to stand and who would stay silent. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from. This story is worth hearing. A gray morning rain drifted through Ridgewood, Pennsylvania, turning the street outside the diner into a mirror of dull light and tired faces. The kind of morning that made even coffee feel like a promise instead of a pleasure. Emily Carter pushed open the glass door with a shoulder that felt heavier than it should have. She was 29, tall but slightly slouched today, her posture bent by exhaustion rather than age. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low ponytail that had started neat 14 hours earlier and ended in quiet surrender. The blue ICU scrubs she wore were clean but wrinkled, the fabric carrying the faint smell of antiseptic that never truly left her skin. Her face was pale, eyes ringed with soft shadows, lips pressed together in the practiced restraint of someone who had spent the night holding chaos at bay. Emily wasn't thinking about dignity or appearances. She was thinking about sleep, about 10 minutes. About food in a paper bag she could take home and eat sitting on the edge of her bed before the world went dark. The diner was warm, fluorescent lights humming gently above cracked vinyl booths. Behind the counter stood Sarah Miller, the morning waitress, a woman in her late 50s with a slender build and sharp cheekbones softened by kindness. Her gray blonde hair was cut just above the shoulders, practical and always tucked behind her ears. Years of standing on tile floors had given her a permanent lean forward, but her eyes were alert, observant, the eyes of someone who had seen every kind of human story spill across these tables. She gave Emily a sympathetic smile, without asking questions. Sarah knew the look of people who had given more than they had left. Near the counter stood Tyler Hayes and Mason Reed. Both were in their early 20s, clean-cut in the way that money often made men look untouched by consequence. Tyler was tall and broad-shouldered, his blonde hair styled with casual precision, a trimmed beard outlining a jaw that had never known manual labor. Mason was slightly shorter, dark-haired, his expression restless, eyes darting, always looking for reaction. Their clothes were expensive but intentionally understated. Jeans without stains, boots without scuffs. They leaned too close to the counter, laughing softly, voices low but sharp enough to carry. Emily ordered without lifting her eyes. As she waited, she felt it before she heard it. The subtle shift in air that came when attention turned unwelcome. Tyler glanced at Mason, lips curling. Mason's laugh followed, light, amused. "Rough night?" Mason murmured, not quite loud enough to be called direct. Tyler smirked. "Looks like she's about to pass out standing." Neither of them spoke to her. That made it easier to pretend it wasn't happening. Almost. At the far corner booth sat Daniel Brooks, 42 years old, broad through the chest, built like a man who had once carried more weight than he ever should have. His movements economical, deliberate. His beard was dark, with threads of gray, trimmed close, the kind of beard that spoke of discipline rather than neglect. A faint scar traced the line of his left eyebrow, old and faded. Daniel wore a work jacket over a flannel shirt, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched in a while. Across from him lay Rex, a 7-year-old German shepherd with sable fur, black layered over warm brown, eyes amber and steady. Rex rested his head on his paws, ears alert but relaxed, the posture of a dog trained to watch without needing to act. Daniel was finishing breakfast before heading to the auto garage where he worked since leaving the Marines, a place that kept his hands busy and his thoughts quiet. Emily took the paper bag when Sarah slid it across the counter. "Take care of yourself," Sarah said softly. Emily nodded, grateful but too tired to respond. She turned toward the door, calculating each step, already imagining the sound of her apartment door closing behind her. That was when Tyler shifted. He didn't grab her. He didn't block her with force. He simply stepped sideways, casually, filling the narrow space between the counter and the booth, close enough that Emily had to stop. She looked up then, startled, her mind still half in the ICU, where alarms meant life or death. Tyler smiled down at her, a smile that never reached his eyes. Mason's quiet laughter followed. "Careful," Tyler said, voice smooth. "Wouldn't want you dropping something." Emily felt heat rise in her chest, a familiar mix of anger and fatigue. She could feel the entire diner holding its breath, or maybe that was just her imagination. She adjusted her grip on the bag, took a small step back, trying to angle around him without making it worse. Her heart thudded harder than it should have. She hated this part. The calculation, the silence, the instinct to make herself smaller. The bag slipped. It wasn't dramatic. No crash, no shattering glass. Just a soft thud as the paper tore and the container inside tipped, spilling across the floor at her feet. Fries scattered, sauce smeared against the tile. For a moment, no one moved. Sarah's hand froze mid-reach. Conversations died. The rain outside tapped against the windows, loud in the sudden quiet. Emily stared down, humiliation flooding her faster than tears. She waited for someone to say something, anything. No one did. From the corner booth, Daniel lifted his head. His eyes moved from the spilled food to Emily's rigid shoulders, then to the two young men standing too close. Rex's ears twitched. Daniel set his mug down slowly, the scrape against the table barely audible, but in the silence of the diner, it felt like a line being drawn. Daniel Brooks rose from the booth without haste, the movement controlled, almost economical, as if his body remembered a different rhythm than the diner's slow morning pulse. He was tall, solid through the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that came from years of learning when to act and when not to. The faint lines around his eyes were not from age alone, but from habit. Squinting into sunlit deserts, watching horizons where hesitation once carried consequences. He did not glare. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood. Rex responded before anyone else noticed. The German shepherd lifted his head, amber eyes alert, ears angled forward. At 7 years old, Rex's muzzle had begun to gray, just enough to show time without dulling strength. His posture changed from rest to readiness, weight evenly distributed, muscles engaged, but he did not growl, did not step forward. He waited. Rex had learned patience the hard way, through long nights and quiet commands that meant safety depended on restraint. Emily felt the shift beside her. She was still staring at the mess on the floor, heart thudding in her ears, when Daniel's presence registered. Relief came first, then embarrassment. She straightened instinctively, smoothing the front of her scrubs with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, not to Tyler or Mason, but to Daniel. The apology came automatically, the reflex of someone used to minimizing herself to keep the peace. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Daniel looked at her then, really looked. He noticed the way her shoulders were drawn tight, the shallow breaths, the exhaustion etched into her face. He recognized that look, not from hospitals, but from other places where people carried more than they could safely set down. He turned back to the two young men blocking the aisle. "She doesn't want to talk," Daniel said. His voice was even, low, carrying without effort. "Please step aside." There was nothing theatrical in it. No threat, no challenge, just a statement of fact delivered with the calm certainty of someone who expected it to be respected. Tyler blinked, surprised that the interruption had come at all. Up close, his confidence sharpened into something colder. His eyes flicked to Daniel's jacket, to the grease under his fingernails that never quite washed away despite effort. "Relax, man," Tyler said, lips curling. "We're just standing here. Didn't know the diner hired security." He glanced at Rex and snorted. "Nice dog." "You bring him to scare people, or is he just for show?" Mason laughed, a short, sharp sound. He shifted his weight, stepping closer, not enough to touch, but enough to crowd. Mason's face was lean, almost handsome, if not for the constant smirk that made it clear he enjoyed reactions more than conversations. His dark hair fell into his eyes, and he brushed it back impatiently, as if the world itself were always slightly in his way. "What's the matter?" he said.
"She can't handle a joke?"
Sarah Miller leaned forward behind the counter, one hand braced on the edge. She was thin, her skin weathered from years of early mornings and late nights, her hair pulled back with a clip that had lost its spring long ago. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Sarah had learned, over 16 years of serving coffee to people in every mood imaginable, that stepping in at the wrong moment could make things worse. Still, her eyes stayed fixed on Emily, worry tightening her features. Emily felt heat climb her neck. She hated that they were talking about her as if she weren't there. "It's fine," she said quickly, the words tumbling out too fast. "Really, I'll just—" She gestured toward the door, meaning to step around Tyler, to pick up what she could and leave the rest behind if she had to. Sleep felt suddenly far away, replaced by the sharp awareness of being seen and judged. Daniel shifted slightly, enough to block the narrow space without touching Tyler. The movement was subtle, practiced. Rex mirrored him by half an inch, still silent. "You heard me," Daniel said. "Step aside." Tyler's smile widened, but there was irritation in his eyes now. "You always talk to people like that?" he asked. "Like you're in charge?" His gaze flicked to Rex again. "And put the mutt on a leash. This isn't some war zone." Something tightened in Daniel's jaw. Not anger. Something quieter. Memory. He thought of places where silence had meant survival, where men learned the cost of unnecessary words. He took a breath and let it out slowly. "Last time," he said. "Please." Emily tried again to move, angling her shoulder past Mason. That was when Mason shifted closer, crowding her space until she felt his presence like pressure. The aisle narrowed. The air felt thicker. She stepped back without meaning to, her heel sliding on the tile. Mason lifted his hands, palms out, mock innocent. "Easy," he said, grinning. "Didn't see you there." His shoulder bumped hers. It wasn't hard. Anyone watching could have called it accidental. But Emily felt the intent in it, the deliberate closeness, the calculated nudge that stole her balance for half a second and made her heart jump into her throat. She staggered, catching herself on the edge of the counter, fingers scraping against laminate. The diner seemed to inhale as one. Daniel saw it, the small, unnecessary contact. The way Emily's body reacted before her mind could catch up. He felt Rex's muscles tense beside him, felt the leash grow taut in his hand. He did not move yet, not forward, not back. He held his ground, eyes locked on Mason, measuring distance, timing, choice. Emily straightened, cheeks burning. She opened her mouth to say something, an apology, a protest, she wasn't sure which, but no sound came out. Mason shrugged, a thin smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "My bad," he said lightly, though his eyes said the opposite. Daniel exhaled, slow and deliberate, the way he used to before speaking into a radio. The quiet warning had been given. It had been ignored, and somewhere between the spilled food on the floor and the mockery hanging in the air, the line had shifted. Daniel stepped fully into the narrow space between Emily and the two young men, his body turning just enough to shield her without making it look like a challenge. He did not touch them. He did not raise his hands. One palm lowered slightly, fingers open, a clear, silent command meant for only one being in the room. Rex obeyed instantly. The German shepherd stayed exactly where he was, muscles coiled, eyes steady, the leash slack but alive in Daniel's grip. Years of training showed in the dog's restraint. Rex had learned long ago that the most dangerous moments were the quiet ones, before movement. Emily's breath caught. From behind Daniel's shoulder, she could see the hard edge in Tyler's smile flatten into something uglier. Tyler had never liked being told what to do, especially not by men he judged beneath him. Up close, the details of his face sharpened, the smooth skin untouched by labor, the faint arrogance in the way his trimmed beard framed his jaw, the confidence of someone who had grown up learning that rules bent when pushed hard enough. He took half a step back, just enough to look casual, just enough to hide what came next. Daniel felt it before it happened. A change in air pressure, a sound behind him that didn't belong. Tyler shoved him. It wasn't a dramatic blow, no wild swing, no clenched fist, just a hard, sudden push between the shoulder blades, calculated and precise. Daniel's weight shifted forward unexpectedly. The chair leg behind him scraped. His coffee mug tipped, hit the edge of the table, and shattered against the floor. Dark liquid splashed across tile, hot and sharp-smelling. The sound cut through the diner like glass breaking underwater. Gasps followed. A chair scraped back. Someone swore under their breath. Daniel caught himself on instinct, boots sliding a fraction of an inch before he found balance again. He turned, already raising his hands slightly, not in anger, but in warning. "Don't," he said, voice firmer now. "That's enough," Emily cried out, the sound small and involuntary. Her hands flew to her mouth as adrenaline surged through her tired body. The moment stretched, thin as wire. That was when Mason moved. Mason Reed had been waiting for chaos. He always did better when things were loud. His lean frame darted forward as Daniel's attention shifted, his fist swinging not toward Daniel's face, but low and fast toward his ribs. It wasn't a clean punch, more of a cheap shot delivered with the confidence of someone who believed surprise was enough. Daniel felt the impact, a jolt, sharp but shallow, more insult than injuring. Training took over. Daniel pivoted, not toward Tyler, but toward Mason. His hands moved without striking, without anger. He caught Mason's wrist mid-motion, fingers locking around bone and tendon with practiced precision. A step in, a turn of the hips, weight shifting through his center. He did not throw Mason. He did not hit him. He simply applied pressure in exactly the wrong direction. Mason screamed. The sound was high, raw, cutting through the diner's noise like a blade. His knees buckled as pain shot up his arm. Daniel released him immediately, stepping back, hands open, palms visible. Mason collapsed onto the floor, clutching his wrist, face twisted in shock and agony. The joint was already swelling, skin flushing red where Daniel's grip had been. "Jesus, what did you do?" Tyler shouted, panic bleeding through his anger. He dropped to one knee beside Mason, hands hovering uselessly, afraid to touch. "You broke his arm!" Daniel took another step back, putting distance between himself and both men. His breathing was steady, controlled. Rex remained silent, standing now, body angled protectively toward Daniel's side, but still waiting for instruction. The dog's eyes never left Tyler. Sarah Miller had moved from behind the counter without realizing it. She stood frozen near the end of the aisle, one hand pressed to her chest. Up close, the years showed on her face, the fine lines etched by worry, the pale skin that never quite tanned. But there was steel in her eyes now. "He told you to stop," she said, voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "Everyone heard him." A man in a construction jacket near the window stood halfway out of his booth, jaw tight, eyes darting between Mason on the floor and Daniel standing with his hands still raised. Another customer pulled out a phone, uncertain, recording more out of instinct than intent. The diner buzzed with overlapping voices, confusion swelling where silence had been. Emily pushed past Daniel despite herself, crouching beside Mason. Her training snapped into focus, overriding fear. She reached for his wrist, then stopped, careful. "Don't move it," she said, voice firm, professional, as if she were back in the ICU. Her hands hovered inches away, assessing swelling, color, angle. "You need ice, and you need to stay still." Mason looked at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. Pain had stripped the mockery from his face, leaving something closer to disbelief. Tyler rose, his expression shifting fast, from panic to calculation. His eyes flicked around the diner, registering witnesses, phones, Sarah's rigid stance. He straightened his shoulders, raised his voice. "This guy attacked us," he said loudly, pointing at Daniel. "He went crazy, just grabbed him out of nowhere." Daniel didn't respond. He kept his hands visible, posture neutral, the way he had been taught to stand when the next step depended on someone else's judgment. Inside, something old and bitter stirred, the familiar realization that truth didn't always matter in the moment it was needed most. From the back of the diner, someone's voice cut through the noise. "I'm calling the police!" The words landed heavy, final. Tyler seized on them. "Good," he snapped, louder now. "Call them. He assaulted us." Emily looked up from Mason, eyes wide, heart pounding. She turned toward Daniel, searching his face for reassurance and finding only calm, resolute stillness. The line had been crossed. Not by violence, but by choice, and the consequences were already moving toward the door. The first patrol car arrived with its lights muted by the gray morning rain, tires hissing against wet asphalt as it stopped outside the diner. The bell over the door rang again, sharp and metallic, announcing authority before a single word was spoken. The noise inside dropped from chaos to a tense, humming quiet, the kind that pressed against the ears. Officer Mark Delaney entered first. He was in his early 40s, broad through the chest, with a square jaw and close-cropped hair already thinning at the temples. His uniform was crisp, boots polished, posture rigid in the way of a man who believed order came from clear lines and quick decisions. Years earlier, Delaney had responded to a bar fight that ended badly when hesitation cost someone their life. Since then, he trusted visible facts more than explanations. Behind him followed Officer Lisa Moreno, younger, late 20s, athletic build, dark hair pulled tight into a regulation bun. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning faces, hands, exit. She noticed details Delaney often missed. Mason was still on the floor, cradling his wrist, pale and shaking. Emily knelt beside him, maintaining distance, her hands hovering as she spoke in a low, professional tone. She had slipped fully into nurse mode, exhaustion temporarily eclipsed by focus. Tyler hovered nearby, anger simmering beneath a performance of concern. Officer Delaney took in the scene quickly. One injured man, one man standing back with hands raised, a large German shepherd at his side. Spilled coffee. Broken ceramic. "Who did this?" Delaney asked, voice firm. Tyler answered immediately. "Him," he said, pointing at Daniel. His face was flushed, eyes bright with adrenaline. "He attacked us. My friend didn't even touch him." Daniel said nothing. He stood exactly where he was, hands open, shoulders squared but relaxed. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his jacket. His beard was neatly trimmed, streaked with gray. his expression controlled to the point of neutrality. Rex lay down at his feet without being told, head resting on paws, amber eyes tracking the officers. At 7 years old, Rex knew this posture well. Still, non-threatening, obedient. His breathing was slow and even. Officer Moreno stepped closer to Emily. "Ma'am," she said gently, "I need you to step back." Emily hesitated, glancing at Mason's wrist. "He needs ice," she said quietly, "and he shouldn't move it." Moreno nodded, motioning another officer to bring a first aid kit, then guided Emily a few steps away. "You can explain everything in a minute," she added, softer now. Sarah Miller stood near the counter, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Up close, the fine lines on her face deepened with worry, her thin frame rigid with the effort of staying calm. "They were bothering her," Sarah said, voice wavering but clear. "Everyone saw." Officer Delaney cut a glance toward her. "Ma'am, we'll take statements after," he said. His gaze returned to Daniel. "Sir, turn around." Emily's heart lurched. "Wait," she said, stepping forward instinctively. "That's not what happened. Ma'am," Delaney interrupted, sharper now. "Please stand aside." Daniel complied without hesitation. He turned slowly, placed his hands behind his back, fingers interlacing. The cold metal of the cuffs snapped closed around his wrists, the sound loud in the quiet diner. Rex lifted his head, ears pricking, a low whine vibrating in his chest before Daniel spoke. "Down," Daniel said softly. Rex obeyed immediately, settling again at his feet, though tension rippled beneath his fur. Emily felt something crack open inside her, anger, disbelief, fear all at once. She looked around, searching for someone, anyone to speak up. Some eyes dropped, others stared at the floor. A man near the window shifted uncomfortably, phone half hidden in his jacket pocket. Officer Moreno approached Daniel, her tone more measured. "Did you strike him?" she asked. "No," Daniel replied. "I restrained him after he hit me." Delaney scoffed softly. "You're the only one standing," he said, "and he's injured." Emily took a step forward again. "I saw it," she said, voice shaking now. "They were harassing me. He told them to stop. They pushed him. One of them hit him first." Delaney's eyes flicked to her, then away. "We'll get your statement," he said. "Right now, step back." The officers escorted Daniel toward the door. Rain spattered against the glass as it opened. Rex remained behind, leash slack on the floor, eyes locked on Daniel. For a moment, it looked like he might rise anyway, training or no training. But Daniel paused just long enough to meet his gaze. "Stay," he said. One word. Rex lay still. As Daniel was led outside, Emily's hands trembled. She turned towards Sarah, who shook her head helplessly. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I tried." The diner door closed. The sound felt final. Minutes passed in a blur. Mason was helped onto a chair, wrist wrapped and iced. Tyler spoke animatedly to the officers, his story smooth now, practiced. Emily stood near the counter, heart pounding, replaying every second, every word she wished she had said louder, sooner. That was when she noticed the man by the window again. He was in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded work jacket and steel-toed boots. His face was rough, stubbled, eyes wary. He caught her gaze and looked away quickly, then back again, decision flickering across his features. As the officers prepared to leave, Emily stepped closer to him. "You saw it?" she said quietly. It wasn't a question. The man swallowed, jaw tightening. "I did," he admitted, barely audible. His hand slid into his jacket pocket. "I didn't know but I recorded some of it." Emily's breath caught. "You have a video?" He nodded once, eyes darting toward Tyler, then back to her. "On my phone." The door closed behind the officers as the rain intensified outside. Emily felt the weight of the moment settle over her, heavy and undeniable. The truth wasn't gone. It was just hiding, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it into the light. Daniel Brooks spent the first night in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and old concrete, sitting on a narrow bench with his cuffed hands resting calmly on his knees. Under the fluorescent light, the angles of his face looked harder, the trimmed beard casting shadows along a jaw that had learned endurance long before patience. He did not pace. He did not argue. Years earlier, a roadside explosion overseas had taught him that panic wasted time and clarity saved lives. Now, clarity was all he had. He thought of the garage, the quiet mornings, the familiar rattle of tools, the owner who had given him a job without questions after discharge. A charge like this could end that. A record would not care about context. Across town, Emily Carter sat on the edge of her bed, shoes still on, scrubs folded on a chair like evidence she didn't know how to put away. Her apartment was small and clean, the kind of place chosen for convenience rather than comfort. Rain traced thin lines down the window. She stared at her hands, noticing the faint tremor that hadn't stopped since the cuffs closed around Daniel's wrists. As a nurse, she was trained to speak up, to advocate when someone couldn't. As an employee of a hospital that prized silence and liability management, she was trained, quietly, not to draw attention. The choice pressed on her chest until it hurt. At the diner, Sarah Miller locked the door and turned the sign to closed with a finality that felt heavier than the metal in her hands. She moved slower than usual, thin shoulders set forward, gray-blonde hair slipping from its clip. Sarah had been young once, bold once, until a night decades earlier when she'd testified against a drunk driver who'd injured a family friend and spent years paying for it in small-town whispers. Since then, she believed in doing the right thing softly. Tonight, softness felt like a failure. The man who had filmed the incident, Evan Pike, sat in his pickup truck with the engine off, phone warm in his palm. Evan was 38, broad-backed, with rough hands and a face weathered by outdoor work. His beard grew in uneven patches, a habit he never bothered to correct. He repaired water heaters and fences, jobs that paid enough and asked little. He disliked attention. His younger brother had once taken a plea deal he didn't deserve because Evan hadn't testified, afraid of losing work. That memory burned now. He replayed the video again, the shove, the cheap shot, the restraint. He closed his eyes and exhaled. The next morning, Emily returned to the diner, hair tied back, wearing a plain jacket over jeans. Sarah looked up, surprised. "You don't have to," she said, voice careful. Emily nodded once. "I know," she replied. They stood together in the quiet, the coffee machine hissing behind them. Evan entered, boots scraping, eyes down. He hesitated, then met Emily's gaze. "I recorded some of it," he said, words coming out like a confession. "I was scared to say anything." Emily swallowed. "Can I see it?" He handed her the phone. She watched without blinking, heart pounding harder with every second. The truth was there. Imperfect, partial, but real. "This could help him," she said softly. Evan nodded. "I'll give it to whoever needs it," he said, then added, "But I can't be the only one." Emily called the station and asked how to submit evidence. The desk sergeant's tone cooled when she mentioned names. "We'll review," he said. "Leave it with the clerk." When she arrived, a woman with precise eyeliner and a practiced smile, Clerk Denise Howell, accepted the file. Denise was in her early 50s, immaculate blouse, posture straight as policy. She logged the submission without comment. Emily left feeling smaller than when she'd entered. By afternoon, word had traveled. Tyler Hayes' family retained counsel. The attorney, Gregory Vale, made his first calls before lunch. Vale was mid-40s, lean, silver at the temples, a voice trained to sound reasonable while moving the ground beneath your feet. He reviewed the docket, noted the submission, and frowned. Evidence changed leverage. He contacted the prosecutor's office with polite urgency, raising questions about chain of custody, relevance, and the dangerous implications of admitting partial recordings. The message was clear. Slow this down. Emily learned about Vale's involvement from a voicemail left on her phone, clipped and formal. "Ms. Carter," it said, "this is Gregory Vale, representing my clients. I advise you to refrain from public statements and to direct any materials through proper channels." The words weren't threatening. They didn't need to be. She listened twice, then deleted it. Her stomach twisted, but something steadied beneath the fear. She called the hospital's compliance line and disclosed her intention to testify. The administrator on the other end paused too long. "We'll note it," they said. "Be mindful of policy." That evening, Emily visited the garage. The owner, Frank Holloway, a stocky man in his 60s with oil-stained hands and a permanently furrowed brow, listened without interrupting. Frank had hired Daniel after watching him rebuild a transmission in silence. "He shows up," Frank said finally. "That counts." He didn't promise anything. He didn't have to. Evan emailed the video to a secure link and forwarded confirmation to Emily. Within hours, his phone buzzed with unknown numbers. He ignored them. When his brother called to say, "You're doing the right thing," Evan felt his shoulders drop for the first time in years. Late that night, Emily sat at her kitchen table, the rain easing outside. She wrote a statement, precise and factual, every sentence measured. Fear lingered, but it no longer led. Somewhere across town, Daniel slept on a thin mattress, unaware that the ground beneath the case had shifted again. Not in his favor yet, but away from silence. The next morning, Emily received a call from a friend at the courthouse. "They know about the video," the friend whispered, "and they're trying to keep it out." Emily closed her eyes, breathed once, and said, "Then we make sure it's heard." The courthouse in Ridgewood rose from the gray morning like a block of cooled stone, indifferent to the people filing through its doors. Inside, Courtroom B smelled faintly of old wood and recycled air. Daniel Brooks sat at the defense table in a pressed but modest jacket, shoulders square, back straight, the posture of a man who had learned long ago that composure was a kind of armor. His beard had been trimmed close that morning, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper than they had been a week earlier. Rex was not allowed inside, and the absence tugged at Daniel more than he expected. The dog's steady presence had been his anchor since discharge. Emily Carter sat 2 rows behind him, hands folded, spine rigid, eyes alert. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her dark hair pulled back neatly, the professional calm she used with patience layered over a thrum of fear she refused to let surface. Across the aisle, Gregory Vale stood with his clients. Vale's suit was charcoal, tailored to make him look leaner, more credible. His silvered hair combed with exacting care. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling rooms. Tyler Hayes and Mason Reed flanked him, both cleaned up for court. Tyler's jaw was smooth, his smile faint and practiced. Mason's wrist was wrapped, his expression a careful blend of discomfort and innocence. They looked smaller here, stripped of the diner's noise and bravado, but the entitlement lingered in their posture. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Laura Kim, approached the lectern. Laura was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed, with a voice trained to cut through distraction. She spoke first, outlining the charge, then yielded to Vale, who stepped forward and painted Daniel as a man trained in violence, a former Marine who escalated a minor dispute. Vale's words were polished, his cadence persuasive. He spoke of excessive force, of a civilian injured, of a dog that could intimidate. Daniel stared ahead, jaw set, remembering the discipline drilled into him after a roadside blast years ago had taken 2 friends and left him alive with a promise to himself: never be the one who loses control. Emily was called next. She walked to the stand with measured steps, shoulders back. The bailiff swore her in. Up close, the jury could see the fatigue beneath her composure, the faint shadows under her eyes from long ICU shifts. Laura asked her to recount what she saw. Emily did not dramatize. She described the looks, the words, the shove that forced her backward, the way Daniel placed himself between her and harm without striking, without chasing. When Vale cross-examined, he pressed on training and adrenaline, on whether she felt protected by a Marine's presence. Emily met his gaze and answered evenly, "I felt protected because he told them to stop and used restraint when they didn't." Her voice did not waver. Then Laura requested the video be admitted. Vale objected. Chain of custody, partial angle, prejudicial impact. The judge, Margaret Holloway, listened without interrupting. Judge Holloway was in her early 60s, hair iron gray, glasses perched low, a reputation for patience and exactness. She asked careful questions of the clerk, of Evan Pike, who testified briefly about recording and submission. Evan stood stiffly, hands clasped, beard uneven, eyes honest. The judge overruled the objection. The screen flickered to life. The grainy footage filled the room. The jury watched the harassment, the shove, Emily stumbling back, Daniel stepping in with an open hand, the lock applied only after a strike from behind. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the projector. Vale sat back, lips pressed thin. During a brief recess, something shifted. Men and women entered quietly and took seats along the back row. They wore no uniforms, no pins. Just ordinary jackets and worn shoes. Their hair ranged from cropped to silvered, their faces lined. They did not whisper. They did not stare. They simply sat, hands folded, eyes forward. Daniel noticed them only when one caught his eye and nodded once, a gesture so small it might have been imagined. Emily felt it too, the weight of presence, steady and unshowy. When court resumed, Laura called a final witness for character testimony. The judge allowed it over objection. The man who approached the stand was Thomas Keller, late 70s, tall but stooped, with a weathered face and a voice softened by age. His suit was old but clean. His hands shook slightly as he raised them to swear in. Thomas had served decades earlier, the war etched into the lines of his face, a limp in his step from a training accident that had ended his career. He looked at Daniel with familiarity. "I've known him for 12 years, Thomas said. "At the Veterans Center. He's the one who de-escalates. He pulls people back when tempers flare. He checks on the quiet ones." Vale tried to undermine him. Memory, bias, sentimentality. Thomas did not bristle. He answered plainly. "If Daniel wanted to hurt someone, you wouldn't be here debating it," he said. "He's careful because he knows the cost." Judge Holloway watched the jury, then the defendants, then Daniel. The verdict came quicker than anyone expected. Not instant, but decisive. The jury returned, faces set. The foreperson stood. Not guilty. Daniel exhaled for the first time in days. Emily closed her eyes, just long enough to steady herself. The quiet men in the back did not cheer. They rose, nodded, and filed out as they had come, without spectacle. As the room emptied, Daniel finally turned. Emily met his eyes. There was no celebration in the look they shared, only relief and recognition. Outside, the clouds thinned, and a pale slice of sun touched the courthouse steps. The story was not over, but the truth had held. The verdict traveled through Ridgewood faster than the rain clouds that had finally broken apart over the courthouse. Daniel Brooks walked down the steps into pale sunlight with a steadiness that felt earned, not triumphant. He was 42, broad-shouldered, beard trimmed close, eyes carrying the quiet focus of a man who had learned how to finish things without celebrating too early. Rex waited outside with Frank Holloway, the garage owner, lying sphinx-like beside an old pickup, sable coat catching the light, amber eyes calm and watchful. When Daniel crouched, Rex rose and pressed his forehead into Daniel's chest, tail thumping once, the practiced restraint of a canine who knew public spaces. Daniel rested his hand on the dog's neck and breathed, the tension finally loosening its grip. Across town, the civil case concluded with less ceremony. Tyler Hayes and Mason Reed settled under pressure. The numbers undisclosed, the headlines unkind. Their families' names, once shorthand for comfort, became footnotes attached to phrases like pattern of conduct and failure to intervene. Reputation did what money could not, left a mark. Emily Carter returned to the ICU on a Tuesday morning that smelled of antiseptic and coffee gone cold. She was 29, dark hair tied back, posture precise, eyes alert. The hospital had issued a statement affirming support and process, language polished to a sheen. Her supervisor, Linda Park, a petite woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and a gentler voice than her reputation suggested, met Emily at the unit doors and nodded once. Linda had built her career on rules because rules saved lives. She also knew when rules needed witnesses. "Glad you're back," she said simply. Emily slipped into the rhythm she knew. Monitors, charts, hands steady, voice low. Courage did not announce itself here. It showed up on time. Daniel returned to the garage the next morning. The place smelled of oil and metal and habit. Frank Holloway, stocky and weathered, clapped Daniel on the shoulder without words. A new apprentice, Noah Lynn, 21, narrow-faced, earnest, watched from across the bay, learning what it looked like when a man came back to work after standing his ground. Rex lay on the concrete near a familiar tire, chin on paws, ears tracking every sound. When a wrench slipped and clanged, Rex didn't flinch. Daniel smiled at that. Training and trust, earned the same way. Sarah Miller reopened the diner with a fresh pot of coffee and a steadier hand. She was tall and thin, gray-blonde hair pulled back, skin weathered by years of early mornings and late nights. The whispers faded. The regulars returned. Sarah kept the same rules she always had: refills without asking, dignity without commentary. But something in her eyes had changed. Silence was still useful. It just wasn't default anymore. Weeks passed. The town moved on, as towns do, but the space where the diner incident had been lived differently now. One afternoon, Emily texted Daniel a single line. "Coffee? Same place." Daniel replied with a thumbs up. When they arrived, separately, there was no apprehension in the door's bell, only recognition. They chose a booth near the window. Sarah brought 2 mugs and set them down gently. "Good to see you," she said, meeting Emily's eyes, then Daniel's. Rex lay at Daniel's feet, older now in demeanor, if not years, 6 years on the clock, sable fur brushed, harness clean. They talked about ordinary things. Emily mentioned a patient who'd squeezed her hand and thanked her like it mattered. Daniel talked about a transmission rebuilt the old way because shortcuts fail. The past sat between them without demanding attention. When a pair of teenagers laughed too loudly at the counter, Emily felt the old spike of memory, and then it passed. Daniel noticed, shifted his chair an inch closer without comment. Standing where you're supposed to stand didn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looked like proximity. Outside, the afternoon warmed. Inside, the coffee cooled. Before they left, Evan Pike stopped by their table. He looked the same, broad-backed, beard uneven, but his shoulders were lighter. "I'm moving some jobs around," he said, awkward smile. "Figured I'd stop hiding." Daniel nodded. Emily thanked him. Evan tipped his cap and went. As they stepped out, Rex rose smoothly, scanning, then relaxed. Daniel paused on the sidewalk and looked back at the diner. The same cracked vinyl, the same window catching the sun. Emily stood beside him, hands in her jacket pockets, breathing easy. Neither of them needed to say it. They had stood when it counted, and the standing had held. Sometimes the miracle we wait for does not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a person who chooses not to look away. Faith teaches us that God often works through ordinary hands, through a nurse who speaks the truth, through a veteran who restrains his strength, through a witness who refuses to stay silent. In everyday life, we face moments when staying quiet feels safer than standing up. But grace is found in courage, and justice grows where conscience is obeyed. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what courage means to you. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can be told. May God bless you, protect you, and give you strength to stand where you are meant to stand.